All right, well, welcome again, everyone. Again, whether you are joining us on Facebook Live, whether you are joining us on in the Zoom call, exactly. We are glad to have all of you here. We are joined today for today's Learning Lunch by Assistant Curator of Education, Scott Corcoran, who spoke with us a couple months ago. Really wonderful presentation last time on Hurricane Frederick. Today, he's talking about the history of SEC football, and so we're so excited, Scott, to have you back again. Before I introduce him, I have a couple announcements to make. The first is that the Roman Empire has fallen. I hope that you were able to come and see our ancient Rome exhibit. It closed. We had a really successful run. Thank you so much to the Bedsole Foundation, to AMNS Calvert for making that exhibit possible. Thank you to so many of you who came out to see that exhibit. We have some exciting announcements on the upcoming exhibit front. Currently, we have an exhibition open called The Art of War, Trench Art of World War II. Fascinating exhibition that consists of works of art that soldiers made out of the implements of war. So things like spent shell casings, other war materials, carvings, all sorts of really interesting. It's a beautiful, a smaller exhibit. If you come to the museum, it's right at the top of the stairs. That is open until October 11th, so I hope you can come by and see that. We'll have some exciting announcements about fall exhibits and opening dates coming soon, so stay tuned for that. But I do want to go ahead and tell you our next really big exhibit is opening at the end of February. Egyptian Mummies and Eternal Life will open February 26th and stay open through the end of June. Lots of opportunities to see really extraordinary exhibit, over 100 ancient artifacts, including mummies, painted sarcophagi, funeral objects. Definitely one not to miss. So put that on your calendar and hope you are looking forward to that. In addition to these virtual learning lunches, the museum is doing all sorts of virtual programming, meeting people where they are. I want to highlight just one of those, and that is that the museum is offering History to Go kits. These are free activity kits. They've been incredibly popular. Every time I walk down, the bucket's empty again. So really popular activity kits. They are free. You can pick them up at the museum's admission desk, and they contain a hands-on activity based on artifacts from our collection. They include instructions, historical information, supplies that will help children complete that activity. So you can just swing by and pick one up, pick up a couple. You can make quill pens, make African masks, again, things based on objects in our collection. Really wonderful opportunity there. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Scott. Again, we welcome Scott. Scott is a member of our staff, so it's a special treat to get to hear from him today. He grew up in Mobile, went to Davidson High School, got his bachelor's in history and master's in education from the University of South Alabama. He is a former history teacher in the Mobile County Public School System and has been with the museum, with the History Museum of Mobile, for 7 years. Like many young men in the South, a love of college football was imparted by his family at a very early age, so an appropriate topic that he's speaking on today. As a child, Saturdays in the fall, look at these pictures of Scott, were illuminated by the glow of the weekly game broadcast by one of the 3 channels on a console TV. Voices of announcers Keith Jackson, and Vern Lundquist filled the family room. Today, his ideal autumn Saturday begins at 8 a.m., flipping between College Game Day and SEC Nation pregame shows, and hopefully ends with a Hawaii home game or another LSU Texas A&M 7 overtime game at 1 a.m. on the Sunday. Today, he'll be sharing stories of how the SEC shaped college football and how college football shaped the South. So please join me in welcoming Scott Corcoran to our virtual learning lunch. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. We do have an opportunity for questions as we're going. While I'm delivering my presentation, if you have any questions, just enter them in the Zoom chat or the Facebook comments, and we'll get to those at the end. And I wanted to give everybody a heads up. My first draft of this presentation came in just over an hour and a half. So I had to trim a good bit to get in the time frame, but there's still a lot of information to cover. ESPN put together 12 hours of content on this topic last year, and I have about 50 minutes, so I couldn't get to everything I wanted. So if I skip a specific game or a specific coach you wanted to hear about, I do apologize. Now, with that being said, I do still have a lot of information to cover, so I'm going to be speaking pretty quickly today, so please forgive me for that. However, I am amused by the irony that I'll be talking about SEC football while speaking like a Yankee. So I wanted to start 1934, LSU's home opener against SMU saw lagging ticket sales because of the Ringling Brothers Circus opening in Baton Rouge that night. As a result, Louisiana Governor Huey Long, you can see him there in the picture, enforced an animal livestock dipping law to delay the circus's arrival. This law was mostly used by livestock farmers and ranchers for pest treatment and pest keeping them from spreading, but Long enforced it on the circus to delay the opening to protect LSU's home opener that year. The next year, after being shot by an assassin, amongst Long's last words were, "God, don't let me die now. I have so much left to do. And who will watch over my darling LSU?" Now, what is it about this sport that inspires so much passion, specifically from the fan bases of the SEC? What is it that causes some of us to do this? Or this? Or this? Or this? We've all heard stories about how some fall weddings in the South have to factor football schedules into planning. Vandy fans, I'm sorry I couldn't find representation for you. I think your ACT scores are a little too high for some of this nonsense. LSU fans, you need to talk with your people. Yours was the only one, as I was doing research, that triggered my internet search filter at work. But since the 1998 season, SEC teams have won 12 of the past 22 national titles. 1998 is when the BCS or Bowl Championship Series started. We'll talk about that a little later. The SEC generated $660 million in revenue in 2019. And we're going to look at what led this sport to grow and develop into the place of culture it holds today. Southern humorist Louis Grizzard once said, "We feel that when we play a ball game, it's our way of life against yours." Southern author Rick Bragg once said a little more poignantly, "As the apparatus of Southern politics threw itself violently into the shameful oppression of civil rights, white Southern players again won national championships and acclaim on the gridiron, as front page headlines belittled and ridiculed the region for its backwardness. College football was not a cure, not a tonic for what was wrong in the South, merely a balm." So let's start looking at the origins of college football. The first college football game was played on November 6, 1869 in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Rutgers-based New Jersey, now known as Princeton, Rutgers won 6-4. Now the game followed London Football Association rules. It was kind of a hybrid of rugby and soccer and resembled little of what modern football today. No touching of the ball with the hands was allowed, and the game was actually played with the soccer ball. Teams of 25 played 10 games, and each goal was a point a game. So they played 10 games, Rutgers winning 6-4. Now, early football was difficult to organize. Each team had their own set of rules, and teams had to agree to specific rules before each game. The game spread across schools in the Northeast. On November 23rd, 1876, Harvard, Columbia, and Princeton met to standardize the rules. This resulted in the formation of the Intercollegiate Football Association. Now, through the late 1800s, football continued to grow and evolve. Beginning in 1876, many changes that brought the game closer to what we know today were introduced by Walter Camp. Some rules attributed to Camp are the line of scrimmage, the snap, down and distance, standard dimensions of a football field, and scoring. Camp's scoring rules were 4 points for a touchdown, 2 points for point after touchdown, 2 points for safeties, and 5 for a field goal. Today, the Walter Camp Award is given to the most outstanding college football player as determined by a group of head coaches and college sports information directors through the Walter Camp Foundation. Now, football spread from the Northeast. The first game recorded in the South was in Virginia on November 2nd, 1873, between Washington and Lee and VMI, or Virginia Military Institute. On April 8th, 1880, Transylvania University played Center College in Lexington, Kentucky. This is widely regarded as the first football game in the Deep South. Over the next 2 decades, football spread to colleges in almost every state of the Southeast. Now, after a conflict over a track meet in 1888, Dr. William Dudley of Vanderbilt looked to organize athletics in Southern schools. On December 21st, 1894, the Southern Intercollegiate Athletic Association was formed. Some rules governing college athletics today, like eligibility limits and transfer rules, originated from the SIAA. Original members of the SIAA included Alabama, the Agricultural and Mechanical College of Alabama, what is today Auburn, Georgia, Johns Hopkins, North Carolina, Sewanee, or the University of the South, Vanderbilt, Virginia, Central University, now Eastern Kentucky, Clemson, Cumberland, Kentucky, LSU, Mercer, Mississippi A&M, now Mississippi State, Southwestern Presbyterian University, Texas, Tulane, and the University of Nashville. Future teams joining the SIAA were Tennessee in 1897, Ole Miss in 1898, Texas A&M in 1903, Florida in 1912, and South Carolina in 1915. Arkansas and Missouri were the only current SEC teams to never be part of the SIAA. Now, as football spread through the South, teams in proximity to each other began to play annually. Students, alumni, and fan bases began to place extra value of these games. And we're going to look at just a few of these rivalries. I only have 50 minutes. So, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Auburn versus Georgia. The game was first played on February 20th, 1892, and has been played a total of 124 times. The only times this game hasn't been played each year was 1893, 1897, 1917 and 18 due to World War I, and 1943 due to World War II. Georgia currently leads this series 60-56 to 8. Auburn legend traces the origination of the War Eagle chant to that first 1892 game. In 1992, when the SEC split into divisions, Auburn and Georgia were placed in separate divisions. This rivalry was protected when the teams were made permanent division rivals. In 2017, the schools met both in the regular season and the conference championship game. The Egg Bowl, Mississippi State versus Ole Miss. The game was first played on October 28, 1901, and has been played a total of 116 times. Ole Miss leads this series 62-46 to 6. After a vicious fight in the 1926 games, the two schools created a trophy of a brass football on a wood and brass pedestal. Since footballs at the time were closer to rugby balls, the trophy has earned the nickname the Golden Egg. The Egg Bowl has been played in 7 Mississippi cities throughout its history. Obviously, the two campus towns, Oxford and Starkville, but also Jackson, Columbus, Tupelo, Clarksdale, and Greenwood. Now, this 1926 game, Ole Miss broke a 13-game losing streak against Mississippi A&M in Starkville. Ole Miss fans rushed the field and attempted to tear the goalposts down. A&M fans then began to defend their field and goalposts, some using chairs. One eyewitness described irate Aggie supporters took after the ambitious Ole Miss group with cane-bottomed chairs and fights broke out. The mayhem continued until most of the chairs were splintered. Now, the term Egg Bowl wasn't actually coined until 1977. Originally known as the Battle for the Golden Egg, a Jackson sports writer coined the term recognizing the unlikelihood of either team making it the postseason play, so the Egg Bowl would be their bowl game. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party, kind of a dated term now, but it's Florida versus Georgia. The game has been played 97 or 98 times, depending upon which school you ask. And the first meeting that both schools agree on was November 6, 1915. All right, y'all, hold up. This is a pretty convoluted story. The schools dispute the first game. On October 15, 1904, Georgia played a game against the University of Florida that was at the time based in Lake City. In 1884, the first land-grant college in the state of Florida was formed as the Florida Agricultural College. 1903, the year before this game that Georgia claims that Florida doesn't, the Florida legislature changed the name to the University of Florida. The year after the game, in 1905, 4 institutions, including this incarnation of the University of Florida, were merged into the University of the State of Florida. This name would be changed to the University of Florida in 1909. This institution would not play Georgia until 1915. Georgia sports historian Dan McGill kind of sums up Georgia's attitude by saying, "That's where Florida was back then. We can't help it if they got run out of Lake City." Now, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party was a nickname first coined in the 1950s by Bill Katzels, a sports editor for the Florida Times-Union. He said he came up with the name after seeing a drunk, stumbling fan offer an alcoholic beverage to an on-duty police officer. Louis Grizzard once referred to the game as the annual celebration of the repeal of Prohibition. The cocktail party nickname proved so popular that the city of Jacksonville used it for many years. However, the city dropped it from most official usage in 1988, following a series of alcohol-fueled outbursts. In 2006, both schools and the SEC asked CBS to abandon the name and promotion. Third Saturday in October, Alabama versus Tennessee. First meeting was on November 28, 1901. That game ended as a 6-6 tie. Alabama leads this series 57-37-8. And the game's marked by streaks. Tennessee currently remains the only team to hold 7 consecutive victories over Alabama. The rivalry has a tradition of winning teams smoking cigars after the game. Given the NCAA rules on extra benefits, the winning team self-reports this violation. And then the Iron Bowl, Alabama versus Auburn. First meeting was February 22nd, 1893, but it's been played only a total of 84 times. Alabama leads this series 46-37-1, and the game was not played for 41 years between 1907 and 1948. The acrimony between the two schools began with the founding of Auburn as a land-grant school over the lobbying of Alabama alumni who were attempting to utilize land grants for the expansion and enrichment of Alabama. Much of this came to a head in 1907. efforts were made to move the land-grant school, Auburn, to Birmingham. Additionally, this same year, Auburn coach Mike Donahue complained about formations Alabama were using during the game. They disagreed over a number of players, per diems, where to find officials. It is also said that the difference of $34, roughly $872 today, prevented the school from coming to terms on a 1908 game. As both schools dug in their heels, the schools refused to come to any terms on future games. In 1944, after attempts were made on a state level to revive the games, Alabama's Board of Trustees refused, stating, an Alabama-Auburn rivalry would lead to an overemphasis of football in Alabama and an unhealthy increase in rumor and rancor between the two schools. The schools still refused to play. In March of 1947, the Alabama legislature passed a resolution directing the two schools to come to terms on a game. When they could still not agree, the next month in April of 1947, the state threatened to withhold funding from both schools. Within weeks, an agreement had been reached. Now, the Iron Bowl was played every year at Legion Field as a neutral site game. Auburn fans bristled at this, as most Alabama home games were also played at Legion Field. At the end of the game's contract in 1988, Auburn coach Pat Dye insisted Auburn play home games at Jordan-Hare Stadium. The first Iron Bowl in Auburn was in 1989, although Dye did agree to play one final home game at Legion Field in 1991. That 1989 game, number 11 ranked Auburn beat number 2 ranked and undefeated Alabama 30-20 in front of a frenzied crowd at Jordan-Hare Stadium. A couple stats about this game. When both teams have been ranked, the higher ranked team is 15-11. Of those 11 games where the underdog won, Auburn holds 8 of those victories. An unranked team has defeated a ranked team on 6 different occasions. Bama has won 5 of those. And since 1948, out of 71 games, at least one team has been ranked in 63 of them. Now, while football spread to the South, it was believed that Southern football was inferior to the game played by Northern schools. The 1899 Sewanee Tigers began to change the reputation of Southern football. The team went 12-0-0, outscoring opponents 322-10. 11 of those 12 games were shutouts. We're going to look at 5 of those games real quick, though. After a conflict with Vanderbilt over gate revenue, the scheduled game for 1899 was canceled. Football manager Luke Leah, and football manager's kind of equivalent to athletic director today, scheduled the game with Texas to fill the gap in this schedule. Now, recognizing that the cost of the trip would offset the profits to the game, he scheduled games on the way back. Over the next 6 days, the Sewanee Tigers played, beat, and shut out Texas, Texas A&M, Tulane, LSU, and Ole Miss. In one game, halfback Henry Silbus was injured with a gash on his forehead, but covered it with quick-setting plaster to be able to keep playing the game. And lineman Bill Claiborne, in the picture you see on the screen, played with an eye patch and would line up against opponents, point to the eye patch and say, "This is what happened in the last game. Let's see what happened today." Now, as the popularity of football expanded, so did attention paid to the brutality of the sport. Again, this is not a new discussion even today. In 1905, 18 players were killed playing the game, and another 150 were seriously injured. Between 1900 and 1905, it was reported that 45 players died during games. Peak of criticism came after a Union College player, Harold Moore, died during a tackle attempt in a game against New York University. Football at the turn of the 20th century was more akin to rugby. The ball was roughly the size of a watermelon. Forward passes were not allowed, leading to short lateral tosses, large scrums of players jockeying for the ball, and vicious hits. As a result, many schools decided to switch the football program to rugby in consideration for the safety of the players. Now, in December of 1905, President Theodore Roosevelt called in representatives from college football to discuss changes to the rules. Roosevelt was a dedicated fan of the sport and wanted to direct changes to make the sport less brutal, but ensure changes did not lead to the game being played on a too ladylike basis. Many believe some of these changes were prompted by injuries sustained by Roosevelt's son, Ted Jr., throughout his playing career. These included lost teeth, a serious facial laceration, and at one point, a broken collarbone. The changes that were made resulted in the creation of the forward pass, 10-yard first downs, and the neutral zone around the line of scrimmage. After meetings with Roosevelt, Henry McCracken, Chancellor of New York University, organized a meeting of 13 schools to discuss changes to the rules of football. At a later meeting on December 28, 1905, 62 colleges and universities formed the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States. In 1910, the IAAUS would expand its scope of organizing all athletic programs at member institutions and changed its name to the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or the NCAA as it's known today. The University of Missouri and Vanderbilt were the only two current SEC teams to initially join the IAAUS. Now, Southern teams had played Northern teams before, but at best scored moral victories. In 1906, Vanderbilt changed that in a game against Carlisle. Vanderbilt, led by Hall of Fame coach Dan McGugin, defeated the Northern Power 4-0 on a single field goal. McGugin and his Vanderbilt teams would begin to change the perception of Southern football. Now, speaking of McGugin, as schools began to see the power of football in the elevation of an institution's profile and donor base, they began to hire full-time professional coaches to increase their level of competition. Dan McGugin at Vanderbilt elevated the profile of Southern football and set the bar for other schools to reach. From 1904 to 1934, McGugin won 197 games and 11 conference championships. During this period, he would beat traditional Northern football powers, Carlisle in 1906, Yale in 1910, and Michigan in 1922. They would also tie powerhouse Navy in 1907. Other coaches include John Heisman. He coached at Auburn, Clemson, and Georgia Tech. The Heisman Trophy is named after him, and he actually had to leave Georgia Tech when, during divorce settlements, his wife was granted the city of Atlanta. Mike Donahue at Auburn and LSU. He also coached and was athletic director at Spring Hill College here in Mobile. Of the coaches who coached multiple seasons at Auburn, with 106 wins out of 146 games, Donahue has the highest winning percentage of any coach at Auburn. Dana Bible at LSU and Texas A&M. His Texas A&M teams in 1917 and 1919 did not allow a single score. This makes him the only coach to accomplish that at two separate seasons at a school. Edgar Wingard at LSU. The 1908 LSU team went 10-0 and was co-SIAA conference champions. The NCAA recognizes LSU as co-national champions, but LSU does not claim this title, a novel concept to some of you Bama fans. Accusations of paid players cast a shadow on the season, despite LSU being cleared by the SIAA. Now, as the role of athletics, especially football, grew on college campuses, divisions began to emerge between larger and smaller schools. In 1915, rifts over freshman eligibility and a summer baseball program that paid players divided the SIAA. In 1920, when the SIAA officially allowed freshman athletes to be eligible, 8 schools immediately broke away from the SIAA to form the Southern Conference. Charter members of the Southern Conference included former SIAA members Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Tennessee. They were joined by non-SIAA members Maryland, North Carolina State, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Washington and Lee. In 1922, Florida, LSU, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tulane, and Vanderbilt also left the SIAA to join the Southern Conference. With the outset of World War II and the difficulty retaining revenue, the smaller schools that remained, with the outset of World War II and the difficulty retaining revenue from the smaller schools that remained, the SIAA disbanded in 1942. Now, the Southern Conference is still in existence today as an FCS or Football Championship Series conference, used to be known as Division I AA. Schools including East Tennessee State University, go Bucks, Sanford, Mercer, and the Citadel, along with 6 others, still exist in this conference. Now, conflicts amongst traditional football and academic powerhouses over the role of academics versus athletics came to a head surrounding the 1926 Rose Bowl. The Pacific Coast Conference champion Washington Huskies were selected after posting a 10-0-1 record. Now, Dartmouth, Yale, and Colgate all turned down Rose Bowl invitations over this conflict over academics versus athletics. Tulane also reportedly refused, believing their players were too small to face the Huskies. Then, 9-0-0 Alabama, coached by Wallace Wade, was invited to the game. Alabama's 9-0 record included 8 shutouts, and in the regular season, Alabama outscored opponents 277-7. Despite the dominance of this Alabama team over their Southern competition, no one gave them a chance over the powerful Washington team. An LA Times reporter believed those swamped students didn't deserve to share the field with the Huskies, and Will Rogers, humorist, would describe Alabama as that team from Tuscaloosa. Before the game, Wade spoke to his players and said, "Southern football is not recognized or respected. Boys, here's your chance to change that forever." The first half went as predicted, with Washington taking a 12-0 lead. But after halftime, led by quarterback fullback Pooley Hubert and halfback Johnny Mack Brown, Alabama scored 20 unanswered points and then held off Washington for a 20-19 victory. Auburn historian Wayne Flint has asserted that it is this game and the pride it gave Southerners that is directly responsible for the prominence of college football in Southern culture to this day. And fun little note, Denny's Stadium ended up being built from the profits of this Rose Bowl. Now, by 1928, the Southern Conference had grown to 23 members. The disparity of needs of the different schools led to growing conflicts between the institutions. Concerns included teams were prohibited from playing games after the Saturday after Thanksgiving. This rule had to be suspended to allow Alabama to play in the 1926 Rose Bowl. Filming, photography, and broadcast of games was banned. Differences regarding scholarships, recruiting, and eligibility arose. All members had to be heard at meetings, making them excessively long, and the geographic footprint made travel cumbersome. After a meeting in Knoxville, Tennessee in December of 1932, 13 schools from the Southern Conference broke away to form a new league, the Southeastern Conference. Those 13 schools were Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt. Sewanee, Tulane, and Georgia Tech would also join, but they would leave the SEC over the next several decades. One major change for the new conference was that universities would be represented by university presidents instead of athletic directors to ensure that athletics would serve the educational goals of each institution. The first president of the SEC was Frank McVeigh, president of the University of Kentucky. McVeigh described the goals of the new conference as developing public appreciation of the educational rather than commercial values in intercollegiate sports. Not sure he would get the votes today. One controversial decision for the new league was allowing student athletes to be eligible for normal student aid. This to some challenged the amateur status of student athlete. Again, these are not new discussions that we're having today. Now, the Heisman Trophy was established in 1935 with the first winner being Jay Berwanger of the University of Chicago. Despite earning national title recognition 17 times, both as SEC schools and pre-SEC, no Heisman winner had come from an SEC institution. This changed in 1942 when Frank Sinkwich of the national champion Georgia Bulldogs won the coveted trophy. In that season, he set the NCAA single-season total offense record with 2,187 yards. Since Sinkwich, SEC players have gone on to win an additional 12 titles. However, this does not include John David Crow in 1957 for Texas A&M or George Rogers of South Carolina in 1980, because while both won Heismans, they did so before their schools were part of the SEC. Now, this leads us to the growth of college football, specifically in the state. Paul Bear Bryant played for Alabama from 1932 to 1935 and was part of the 1934 national championship team. After his playing days, he entered coaching and was head coach of Maryland, Kentucky, and Texas A&M, and in 1957, he became the head coach at Alabama. Bryant had a head coaching record of 323 to 85 to 17, including 14 SEC titles, 1 Southwestern Conference title, and 6 national championships. He was also 12-time SEC Coach of the Year. His 323 wins are still ranked 3rd most coaching wins in Division I football history. But one of the main things I want to look at regarding Bryant's tenure at Alabama is the Bear Bryant Show. Bryant was responsible for numerous innovations while at Alabama, like the wishbone offense, recruiting, and an unparalleled coaching tree. 3 former assistants went on to coach national championship teams, Danny Ford at Clemson in 1981, Howard Schnellenberger at Miami in 1983, and Gene Stallings at Alabama in 1992. 10 other former assistants went on to coach NCAA teams, and 1 went on to be an NFL coach. But one of the biggest impacts during his tenure was the Bear Bryant Show. For the entire run of his Alabama coaching career, he would host the hour-long highlights show. Bryant had the rights to game films put into his contract, and through sponsorships was paid $3,000 a week to host the show. $3,000 in 1958, roughly equivalent to $29,000 today. Now, during this era, the NCAA held all rights to broadcast games, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail in a bit. However, Bryant recognized there was no regulation of game highlights and hosted a recap the next day. The broadcast became so popular in the state, local affiliates would often cut into NFL coverage to start the show on time, as the Bear drew higher ratings in the state than the NFL did. Bryant insisted on an hour-long format to show as many plays and players as possible, which he believed was a powerful recruiting tool. It actually became must-see TV for many of his players to see what he would say about them. It also allowed the Bear to leverage his personality, further cementing his iconic status in the state. One notable quip, after an Alabama loss, Bear's sidekick on his show told him, "The Lord just wasn't with us this day, Coach." "The Lord," growled Bryant, "expects you to block and tackle." Now, one of the dark marks on the SEC is its history with integration. Black players have been part of college football almost since its inception. Black players were part of Midwestern teams in the early 1890s. George Jewett of the University of Michigan became the first black college player in 1890. Now, there was a so-called gentleman's agreement that integrated Northern teams would sit black players when playing against Southern teams. After World War II, attitudes towards segregation began to change across the country. Northern schools began to refuse to abide by racist policies of Southern states and their segregated schools. Now, these segregationist positions almost came to a head leading up to the 1953 Orange Bowl, which pit Alabama against a Syracuse team with a black player on the roster. While Adamus Stone was on the roster for Syracuse, he sustained an injury during the preseason and had to sit out all the games that season. However, Alabama President John Galilee ordered Alabama coach Red Drew to leave the field if Stone entered the game. But integration finally came to the Sugar Bowl, an SEC play, in 1956 when the SEC's Georgia Tech, over strenuous protests from Georgia Governor Martin Griffin, accepted a bid to play a Pittsburgh team featuring standout African-American fullback Bobby Greer. Governor Griffin sent a telegram to the Georgia Tech Board of Regents demanding that they reject the bid to play an integrated team. Students and faculty protested the decision, and Georgia Tech President Blake Van Leer, already at odds with Griffin over admitting women to Georgia Tech in 1952, ignored the demand and accepted the bid. However, it would take more than 10 years for an SEC team to field an integrated squad. That changed on September 30th, 1967, when Nate Northington played for Kentucky in their game against Ole Miss. This marked the first integrated league game in SEC history. Northington was signed to Kentucky in 1966, but freshmen were not able to play on varsity teams during this era. Now, Northington was joined by another African-American player, Greg Page, in his 1966 freshman class. Sadly, Page suffered a severe spinal injury during an August practice and died 38 days later, the day before this Ole Miss Kentucky game. Over the next several years, every SEC team would have integrated squads. Tennessee in 1968, Auburn, Florida, and Mississippi State in 1970, Alabama, Georgia, and Vanderbilt in 1971, and LSU and Ole Miss in 1972. Now, Missouri would actually integrate its team in 1859, but at that time was part of the Big Eight, not the SEC. Arkansas and Texas A&M would do so in 1970, both as part of the Southwest Conference. South Carolina did as well in 1972 during its last year as part of the ACC. Tulane and Georgia Tech were SEC members when integration started, but both left the conference before their teams integrated. While teammates would mostly welcome African American players, opposing teams would often target them with dirty play. And often even their own fan bases would hurl insults and abuse at these African American players. But these pioneering players would pave the way for African American players in the SEC today. Now, looking at college football media rights, broadcast of college football began in 1939, slowly expanding during World War II. When the University of Pennsylvania and Notre Dame entered into contracts with national broadcasters, the NCAA prohibited live broadcast of games in 1951. The NCAA was concerned that televised broadcast of games would hurt the revenue generated from game attendance. Now, the following season, the NCAA softened its position and allowed the broadcast of one game a week, provided those games were sold out at the stadium. In 1955, the NCAA relented more and allowed regional games to be broadcast only on 5 specific weeks during the season. Now, frustrated with the NCAA limitations, 63 schools formed the College Football Association to negotiate their own media rights and challenge the NCAA in 1977. In 1981, after the NCAA threatened severe sanctions against teams in the CFA, University of Georgia and Oklahoma sued the NCAA under antitrust violations. In 1984, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the NCAA, opening up schools and conferences to negotiate their own media deals, greatly expanding the availability of college football on television. Now, much of the growth of college football broadcast expansion during this era was fueled by the brand new technology of cable television. Fledgling new networks were desperate for content, and college football was ready-made. One result of this ruling was the JP or Jefferson Pilot Sports Game of the Week. Usually not the best available game, but it allowed TV time for schools that absolutely would not have had the exposure under the previous NCAA system. And this game continues to hold the cherished spot of nostalgia for many SEC fans of a certain age. Now, despite sustained national success in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the SEC did not have similar success in the 1980s. The SEC had 3 national titles in the 1950s, 4 in the 1960s, and another 3 in the 1970s. The SEC had no national titles in the 11 seasons between Georgia's 1980 title and Alabama's 1992 championship. In that span, from the 1981 to 1991 seasons, the SEC had no teams finish in the top 2 of the final AP poll for each season, and only 2 during that 11-year span that would finish in the top 3. Now, the primary highlight of the SEC of this era was the success of Heisman Trophy winners Herschel Walker of Georgia in 1982 and Bo Jackson of Auburn in 1985. This brings us to Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier was a Heisman-winning 2-time All-American quarterback for the Florida Gators. He was only the 3rd SEC player and first SEC quarterback to win the Heisman when he won it in 1966. That year, Spurrier finished the season with 2,012 passing yards. The average of passing yards for the top 10 quarterbacks in the SEC that year was only 913 yards. Now, after a relatively unsuccessful stint in the NFL, in 1977, he began his coaching career as an assistant at Duke and later joined the Georgia Tech staff. In 1987, he accepted his first collegiate head coaching position at Duke. And in 1990, he was hired as the head ball coach at his alma mater, the University of Florida. Now, Spurrier immediately brought his passing-focused offense to Florida called Fun and Gun in the sports media. This would affect the whole of SEC play in the process. Now, during this era, it was believed that passing was something you did when you couldn't run. In 1989, the year before Spurrier took over at Florida, the SEC passing leader was Tommy Hodson of LSU with 2,655 yards. That year, LSU finished 4-7, 2-5 in SEC play. Again, the year before Spurrier arrived, the average number of passing attempts for the top 10 quarterbacks in the SEC was almost 232, and the average passing yardage was about 692 yards, 1,692 yards over the season. By the time Spurrier left Florida in 2001, those numbers had grown to an average of about 315 attempts per quarterback. That's a 36% increase. And an average yardage of 2,524 yards per quarterback, a 49% increase. During his time at Florida, Spurrier led the Gators to 1 national title, 6 SEC titles, 1 Heisman winner, Danny Werfel, and he also won at least 9 games in all 12 seasons of Florida. His Florida teams played in 7 of the first 9 SEC championship games, winning 5 of those, and he's the only Heisman winner to coach a Heisman winner. Now, another significant contribution of Spurrier, especially in the days of media expansions, were his verbal jabs at rivals. They became fodder for sports writers and intensified already established writers. And we're just going to go over a few of those. I'm playing Georgia early in the season. I don't know. I always sort of like playing them that second game because you could always count on them having 2 or 3 key players suspended. On the note, and this was during his run at South Carolina, on the number of times he coached against Tennessee in Knoxville, it'll be the 14th time I've coached in Neyland Stadium. I've coached there more than some of their head coaches. On recruiting in Alabama. In 12 years at Florida, I don't think we ever signed a kid from the state of Alabama. Of course, we found out later that the scholarships they were giving out at Alabama were worth a whole lot more than ours. On the need to coach up your blue chip recruits, you can have good ball players and still not win football games. All you LSU fans know about that. And during his time at South Carolina, his biggest rival was Dabo Swinney's Clemson team. And in response to Dabo Swinney's angry response to a quote misattributed to Spurrier, I didn't say it. Smart people don't believe everything they read and don't believe hearsay. I guess Dabo believed it. Sorry, Auburn fans, but the best one, on an Auburn football dorm fire that destroyed 20 books, but the real tragedy was 15 of them hadn't been colored in yet. Now, with lucrative media right opportunities, the SEC explored options to expand the regional footprint of the conference and increase their value. SEC leaders exploited a little utilized NCAA rule allowing a 12-team conference to create divisions and have a championship game. The division championship rule was mainly for Division II schools, and no Division I conference had ever explored the option. Beginning in the 1992 season, Arkansas and South Carolina were added to the SEC, and the East and West divisions were created. Arkansas believed that they were marginalized by the other 7 Texas schools in the Southwestern Conference, and the smaller Texas private schools, Rice, Baylor, TCU, and Houston, hindered their respectability on a national level. Both they felt would be improved by joining the SEC. And the year before joining the SEC, playing as an independent, South Carolina operated at a $300,000 deficit and believed joining the SEC would help their monetary issues. Now, this led to the inaugural SEC championship. That game was held on December 5th, 1992, and featured number 2 Alabama versus number 12 Florida. And many schools were actually hesitant to add a conference championship game, thinking it would hurt the league's chances at a national championship. And remember, this was during that period between Georgia's 1980 title and Bama's 1992 title that would come later that season. But they were concerned about adding another highly competitive game to a contender's schedule. But these fears were only realized one time when in 2001, number 21 ranked LSU beat number 2 ranked Tennessee, allowing once beaten Nebraska to earn a spot in the BCS game against that year's undefeated Miami team. Alabama would go on to win that game 28-21 en route to winning the national championship, again, the SEC's first in 12 years. Now, as a result, every Division I conference except the Western Athletic Conference now plays a conference title game. Now, as a result of the value of league games and ratings for the championship game, in 1994, the SEC signed an approximately $100 million 5-year deal with CBS. The SEC actually left the CFA to negotiate this deal with CBS independently, and the deal was for $17 million a year plus a per-game fee for basketball rights. Now, this leads to the BCS era. With bowl game tie-ins in this era, determining a national champion was a difficult, subjective process. After a few attempts to organize bowl games to allow for a national championship game, the Bowl Championship Series was born in 1998. Now, many bowls had right to host champions from specific leagues. So if the AP number 1 and AP number 2 team were bound to different bowl games, there was no way they could meet. Between the founding of the AP poll in 1936 and the establishment of the BCS in 1998, AP 1 versus 2 only happened 11 times in season-ending bowl games. Now, in this first BCS game, the SEC's Tennessee beat Florida State 23-16 to claim the first BCS title. The quarterback for the 1998 Tennessee was Mobile's own T. Martin. And SEC teams would go on to win 9 of the 16 BCS games and be the only league to place 2 teams in the same game. That was Alabama LSU in 2011. Now, other teams and conferences negotiated media deals, and college football became a big moneymaker for media companies. In 2008, the SEC signed a new 15-year, $55 million per year deal with CBS. The deal was for 12 weeks of games, including 1 or 2 doubleheaders, and the championship games. However, that same year, the SEC negotiated a deal with ESPN. The contract was valued at $2.25 billion over 15 years. The ESPN deal included all weekly football games not given to CBS and all other sporting events not currently retained by CBS. And y'all, I know we're running short on time. I've just got a couple more slides to go, and then we'll finish up. Now, in 2011, the SEC expanded to 14 teams, adding Texas A&M and Missouri from the Big 12. This gave the SEC media footprints across Texas and the valuable market of St. Louis, Missouri. The wider market access allowed the SEC to renegotiate with ESPN. In 2014, the SEC and ESPN announced a 10-year extension of the 2008 contract that included the creation of an SEC-specific SEC network under the ESPN umbrella. Now, this deal lifted the afternoon game exclusivity of CBS for that 2:30 Central time slot. And the SEC network also allowed coverage of sports that would otherwise not get the opportunity to be broadcast, like, say, gymnastics or equestrian events. And that leads us into our modern era with the college football playoff. Beginning in the 2014 season, a 4-team playoff was created to determine the national champion. Over the 6 years of the CFP, the SEC has placed 7 teams in the playoff. So far, the only conference to place 2 teams in the playoff in the same season's SEC, that was Alabama and Georgia following the 2017 season. And the SEC has won 3 of the 6 national titles under this system, including reigning champions, the 2019 LSU Tigers. And again, we look at the SEC and see its passion, its history. Steve Spurrier said, for some reason, the sport of football, winners and losers, it really means something to each side. You get bragging rights for the year. If you win, you feel like you're a little smarter than the other guys. You're a little tougher than the other guys. And some feel that the focus on SEC fans is just another way to kind of further belittle the South. Crazy football fans are all over the place. I think Rick Bragg put it best when he said, people who say they're football crazy down there probably play on something called Smurf turf or wear blocks of foam rubber cheese on their heads. The people who say football is religion down there should be reminded that we did not invent football, Jesus. Well, that's more than my time for today. I want to thank everybody, and let's see if we have time for some questions.
Thank you again so much. What a wonderful presentation. Great, really great presentation. So enjoyed it and learned so much as an avid Alabama football fan. I have to say I'm glad that field goals are not worth 5 points anymore. Thank you so much for that. We've had some questions on Zoom, but other participants have answered them as they've come up. And we've had some questions on Facebook, but I think you answered them over the course of the talk. They were kind of towards the beginning, and they're things you addressed. So really wonderful, thorough presentation, and being mindful of time and not seeing, I'm just going to check one more time. Not seeing any new questions. I will thank you again really for that wonderful presentation. We've got hand claps and thanks coming in on the Zoom chat and on Facebook as well. So thank you again so much. Glad to see you and appreciate the time and effort you put into this presentation.
All right, well, I'm just glad everybody made it, and I hope everybody enjoyed it as well. Thank you all very much.